right. So, sorry. So we discussed first order equations so far, correct? Is that okay? Yes. So let's just quickly recall what all did we do. We started out with linear equations and the attempt was to solve them, and we then considered Bernoulli equations, which were reducible to linear equations by certain substitution. Then we also looked at non-linear first order equations. Some of them were variable separable, some of them were reducible to variable separable, and we also considered exact equations and the concept of integrating factors, right? You multiply with a certain function so as to get another equation which turns out to be exact. Right? And so, this includes the examples of reducible to exact equations. And then lastly, we considered existence and uniqueness results for initial value problem, wherein the ODE is a first order equation. And we discussed Peano's existence theorem and Picard-Lindelow's existence uniqueness theorem. And we also outlined the proof using Picard's method of successive approximation, which is known as the Picard's iteration method. Correct? Okay. So the goal for today's lecture would be to consider second order equations, right? So we would start out with second order linear ordinary differential equations. Recall that we are looking at linear in the y variable, the unknown function y. So a general second order linear ordinary differential equation is of the following format. A2, which is a function of the variable x alone, d square y by dx square plus a1 dy by dx plus a0 xy equals some function g of the variable x alone. Correct? Now, we say that any ODE of the form d square y by dx square plus px dy by dx plus qxy equals to rx is a second order linear ordinary differential equation in standard format, much like the similar nomenclature we had for first order linear differential equations also. Okay, and now having defined what is a second order linear ODE in standard form, what is that we have? So the goal is to find solutions of such ODE, but there is no universal formula, and what we have to contend with the existence and uniqueness and the number of solutions of such ODE. So let's see. Let's take it up one by one. Okay. So if suppose R is identically equal to 0 in the above equation, the right hand side is set to 0, then what we have is the following ODE: d square y by dx square plus px dy by dx plus qxy equals 0. Okay. So then this ODE is said to be homogeneous. So I have a second order linear homogeneous ordinary differential equation here in standard format. And otherwise, we say that the ODE is non-homogeneous, right? If we have a function r of x appearing on the right-hand side. Right? Okay, all right. So let's discuss what is an initial value problem of a second order homogeneous linear equation. So I have a second order linear homogeneous equation in standard format here. D square y by dx square plus px dy by dx plus qxy equals 0. At x equal to x naught, I have y takes the value a, and I also have the following information that at x equal to x naught, the derivative of y equals b. A and b are any real numbers, and p and q we will assume to be continuous on a certain interval containing the point x naught, where initial data is available. All right. So is this okay with everybody present here?
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
yeah, we haven't done much so far. Yeah. Okay, all right. Let's go ahead. So let's look at the uniqueness result. This is much like what we stated for first order linear ordinary differential equations in standard format. So what does the theorem say here? So let's consider the following initial value problem. We have a second order linear ODE, homogeneous ODE in standard format, which means that I have d square y by dx square plus px dy by dx plus qx y equals to 0, and initial conditions available at the data point x naught. Y at x naught is a, and the derivative of y at the point x naught is b. Suppose that p and q are both continuous on an interval I containing the point x naught. Then for any real numbers a and b, there is a unique solution to this initial value problem throughout the interval I. Yeah. So we must understand, what is this theorem saying? There are many things. Yeah? First thing is that this initial value problem has a solution. That is, the solution exists. Second, the initial value problem has only one solution. That is, the solution is unique. And third, the solution is defined throughout the interval I. And what is this interval I? Interval I is where the coefficients P and Q are continuous. Yeah. And the solution is at least twice differentiable there. Correct? Is that okay? Everybody with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. So let's consider this example. I have x square d square y by dx square plus x dy by dx minus 4y equals 0. And initial data at the point x naught. Okay. So then if I apply this uniqueness theorem, what is that I can say? Where can I assert uniqueness in this example? Uniqueness of the solution? Wherever the coefficients P and Q are continuous. Yes, somebody was saying that. Go ahead, go ahead.
The complete R.
Sorry?
Complete R.
Not the complete R. See,
Where zero is not there.
Zero to infinity. Zero to infinity.
infinity depending.
We don't know what is x naught, right?
Yeah. So it
Depends what. Yeah.
infinity,
Either 0 to infinity or minus infinity to 0.
depending on where x naught belongs, right? One has to be careful here because the hypothesis requires P and Q to be continuous on this interval I. So in this case, P is 1 by x and Q is minus 4 by x squared, right? So you have to be careful at the origin. Yeah. But the point is, no matter what values A and B take, you are guaranteed that the solution exists uniquely. All right. Okay. Let's see next. So we will sort of skip the proof for now. Let's look at the following setting. Yeah. So what is it? So given this interval I in on the real line, I want to consider invent the following notation. Yeah. So what is Ci? Ci is the set of all continuous functions, continuous real valued functions defined on I. C1I is the set of all continuously differentiable functions. Yeah. So the function f exists, it's continuous. The first derivative of f also exists and is continuous throughout I. And the set of twice differentiable, well, not twice differentiable, C2I, yeah, twice continuously differentiable functions is denoted by C2I. So each function f in this set is continuous, so is the first derivative, and the second derivative exists and is also continuous. Right? So what is that I want to do? I will first, let's just note the following thing, that each of these sets defined here are indeed vector spaces. So I have to give you, under what operations, with addition and scalar multiplication defined in the usual sense, right? So please check that these are all vector spaces. Okay, all right, so this is good, but what is that how is this information related to what we are discussing? So here comes the common link. Now it is helpful to introduce the differential operator notation. Yeah. So what is that I'm trying to say? So for any function f that is twice differentiable on the interval I, which means that f belongs to C2I, so twice continuously differentiable, because I also demand that the second derivative is continuous here. I will say that I will introduce the differential operator given by the equation L of f is f double prime plus px f prime plus qx f, right? So please note that the output here, L of f, is a continuous function on the interval I. Correct? Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes? Okay. Now, please check that L is a linear transformation. Yeah, what does it mean? It means the following, that if you have any two functions f and g, which are twice continuously differentiable on the interval I, and c and d be any arbitrary real numbers, then L applied to Cf plus dg will give you the same output as L applied to f multiplied by c, and add this to L applied to G and multiplied by D, correct? Now, having defined a linear transformation, what is that we do next? You know, there's natural vector spaces, sort of subspaces that come with any linear transformation, one of them being the null space of a linear transformation, right? We are going to denote it by N of L. So what is the null space of the linear transformation? It would mean that let's collect all those functions f which are twice continuously differentiable on this interval I, such that L of f is 0. Yeah? So this differential operator, when it applies to f, that is 0. Correct? Is that okay? Now, how is all of this related to what we are discussing comes in next. So please note that the null space of this linear transformation L is exactly the solutions of the ordinary differential equation d square y by dx square plus px dy by dx plus qxy equal to 0. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Ma'am,
yes.
why are we saying consists of solution? Won't they be the exact solutions of ODE?
It is. The only thing is the following, to begin with, if I consider the solutions of this ODE, I want y to be twice differentiable. But what we are interesting here, sort of emphasizing here is that f is actually twice continuously differentiable, So what it means is the following. F double prime is also continuous. Is that okay?
Ma'am, come again. I did not get you.
So I'm also emphasizing that the solution is, twice differentiable, and it's also continuous. The second derivative is also continuous.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. So far so good with everybody, right? So we introduced a differential operator, and we also saw how it is linked to what we are sort of discussing as of now. Yeah. So this actually gives you solutions of a second order linear ordinary differential equation which is homogeneous. All of this is under the assumption that P and Q are continuous on a certain interval line. Correct?
Hello.
Yes.
Ma'am, so does that mean that the null space will not include all the solutions?
Okay, so I will just throw this question open to everybody. What are your thoughts?
Like, I mean, yeah, since you're only restricting to like continuously like C2, then obviously there is a possibility that some solutions are.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, let's just hold on and let's see. Let's go ahead for the moment. Yeah, we'll come back to this. Meanwhile, I'll just increase the volume. It's raining quite hard and I'm not able to hear you actually clearly. Maybe it's better. Okay, all right. Okay. What's the next thing, right? Having defined the null space of this linear transformation, I would like to talk about the dimension of the null space next, right? So here is what we have. So given an interval I in R and P and Q be two functions which are continuous on this interval I, let's consider the linear transformation L defined on the vector space of all twice differentiable continuous functions on I. So recall we had defined this as L of f as f double prime plus px f prime plus qx f, right? Okay. And the null space of this vector space, of this linear transformation is given as following, right? So all those functions f which are which for which L of f is 0, correct? Okay. Now, so this is a theorem which says that the dimension of the null space equals 2, which is the same as the order of the corresponding ordinary differential equation. Yeah. So I hope the statement of this theorem is okay with everybody present here. Yeah, so please
Yes,
note,
ma'am.
yeah, please note there's a lot of it that goes in here. First, you have a second order ordinary differential equation. 2, it is linear. 3, it is homogeneous. 4, it is in standard format. 5, you assume P and Q to be continuous on the interval I. Then you define a differential operator. Then that turns out to be linear transformation. Then consider its null space and then say that the dimension is 2. Yes. So there's a lot that goes in, and all of that needs to be taken into account. Yeah. So again, we will skip the proof of this dimension theorem, but here is what I would like to do instead. Okay, let's see. So let's see. So I say that if y and y1 are solutions of the homogeneous equation given as follows: d square y by dx square plus px dy by dx plus qxy equal to 0 on an interval I, then any linear combination of y1 and y2, which means that any function that looks like c1 y1 plus c2 y2, where c1 and c2 are some arbitrary real numbers, is also a solution of this homogeneous equation on the same interval I. Yeah. So this is under the assumption that p and q are continuous on I. So why should this be true?
Ma'am, because a linear transformation, I mean,
Correct.
that because it's linear.
Because the ODE that we started off is linear. What is linear here?
Ma'am,
Because
the
the
transformation is linear
Okay, so then
on the given vector space. So it would satisfy any linear combination of two solutions.
so the solution space is a vector space. Yes, that's what you're using here. Is that the case?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. I
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah. So is this good with everybody present here?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. Let's see.
And you want to say y1 and y2 are basis of the solution.
See, we don't know y1 and y2 are bases. y1 and y2 are any two solutions as of now. Y1 and y2 need not be linearly independent. And I'm not saying that the y1 and y2 span the entire solution space. So there is nothing of that sort asserted here.
Okay.
Yes, all I'm trying to say, if y1 and y2 are solutions of this equation 1, then any linear combination is also a solution.
But ma'am, dimension is 2 now, so there must be two solutions that are linear independent.
Correct, but y1 and y2 may not be those, right? That will come later, but so dimension is 2. There must be some two linearly independent solution, but God knows what. y1 and y2, meaning they may not be linearly independent, right? Meaning
What is the homogeneous equation here?
Homogeneous means that the right hand side is 0. If there was a function Rx on the right hand side appearing here in equation 1, that would be non-homogeneous.
Okay.
Okay, that's the definition of a homogeneous equation. Yes. So is this okay with everybody?
yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay.
This theorem is fine.
All right. Let's go ahead. All right. So the next question that comes up naturally after the dimension, as many of you rightly pointed out, is to find out the basis of the solution space. Yeah. So what is that we know from the dimension theorem? That under all this hypothesis, right? You have a second order linear homogeneous equation in standard format, and the coefficient function p and q are continuous on an interval I. So then you define an appropriate differential operator L, and that turns out to be a linear transformation. You look at that null space, and the dimension of that null space is 2, right? So, okay. So is it possible to find out an explicit basis of the solution space, of this null space, right? Okay. So here is what is known. So suppose that f and g be two solutions of this second order linear homogeneous differential equation in standard format. So d square y by dx square plus px dy by by dx plus qxy equal to 0, where p and q are assumed to be continuous on a certain interval I in R. Right? Suppose that I know that, you look at this vector f of x naught, f prime x naught, and another vector g of x naught, g prime x naught. Suppose that these two turn out to be linearly independent in R2. And what is the point x naught? Point x naught is some point on the interval I where p and q are assumed to be continuous. If that is the case, then the solution space to this ODE is actually the linear span of f and g. Right? I'll sort of pause for a minute for you to sort of understand the statement of this theorem. So what is this saying? If there is any other solution of this ODE, that must be a linear combination of f and g. Is that okay?
Won't it boil down to just that and just the fact that g of x is not a scalar multiple of f of x?
See, you need two data points. You will also need the information about the derivative of g. So you are doing the second order differential equation, no? Not just g f x, but also g prime of x naught. You will also need
Means
that.
if these two are linearly dependent, then g must be a scalar multiple of f of x naught, right? Else these two cannot be linearly dependent.
See, if you have g of x naught, see, what is it you want to say? G of x naught is a scalar multiple of f of x naught. Then
that is the only case in which these two can be linearly dependent vectors.
Why is that the case?
Because if two vectors are linearly dependent, those two vectors are scalar multiples of each other.
Correct. So we are considering vectors in R2, right? These are vectors in R2.
Right.
Correct.
So g of x naught should be multiple of f of x naught, and g dash of x naught should be multiple of f prime of x naught.
Correct. So you did not say the other thing first, right? So g prime x naught
so
is also...
one implies the other, right? Like if g of x naught is multiple of f of x naught, that will imply g prime.
Why that be case? See, information at one point g of x naught is a multiple of f of x naught will tell you nothing about the derivative of g at x naught. You need information around with in a neighborhood of x naught to conclude something about the derivative at a point.
Isn't this true for all x naught?
No, just some x naught. Some x naught. That's the whole point. See, the theorem says you need linear independence of these two vectors at some point x naught. Yeah, not all x naught. Yeah. So now you realize what you were saying.
Okay.
Correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, is that
right.
okay? So let's run through the proof. Yeah, maybe your sort of doubts will be clear. Yeah, but now you understand, right? The hypothesis is only at some fixed point of the interval I. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's see how do we go about it. So suppose that H is a solution of this ODE. What is that we want to show? We want to show that H is a linear combination of F and G. Correct? Yes. So which means that I need to find real numbers C and D such that I should be able to write H as C times F plus D times G throughout the interval I. Correct? That's what I want to do. Correct? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes. So how do I find such C and D? I have information about something happening at the point x naught. So let's just use that information. What is it I know? So if this were to be true, then you just plug in at the point x naught. So this is what I want to hold throughout the interval I. Yes. So maybe I'll sort of edit that when I put that on Moodle. So I want this for all x. Yes. Okay. So I plug in x equal to x naught. So which means that this is true, and this has to be true for all x. Then the same has to valid for the corresponding derivatives also at the level of derivatives also. Yeah. So h of x naught is c times f x naught plus d times g x naught, and Similar statement for the first derivatives also. H prime at x naught is c times f prime x naught plus d times g prime x naught. Now remember what is that we have to do? We have to compute c and d. Okay. So writing this in matrix format, this is exactly this. Yeah. So we have to solve for c and d. Now, and what is that the information that I have? The information that I have is that the columns of this matrix, this 2 by 2 matrix, are linearly independent, correct? So what does it say?
Ma'am, ma'am, can you increase the volume of your mic?
I will.
Thank you.
I do, but I don't know why does it go back always. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, is it little better now? Maybe
Yes,
I'll
ma'am.
make it full. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, this is much better.
Okay. All right. Or maybe I'll hold this close. All right. So what am I saying? I am writing this in matrix format, and then what is that I want to do? I need to solve for C and D. And what is known to me is that the column, the columns of this 2 by 2 matrix, these are linearly independent, correct? So what is that we know in such a setting?
Inverse exists.
Inverse exists. And then what is that we can say? What more?
The solution.
That this matrix is invertible, and what else?
There is a unique solution.
There is a solution which can be written down in the following format, correct? Yes. Now, what does this? So we have found some C and D. What does these C and D achieve? So these C and D actually satisfy the first two equations on the top of this slide, correct? Is that okay? Is everybody, yeah, everybody with me up till this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. So what is the name of this method?
It's
Kramer's rule.
Kramer's rule.
Kramer. Okay. Good. Very good. All right. Yeah. Good for reminding. Good for nevertheless. Okay. So I would like to clarify that we are still not done. We have found certain C and D which satisfy these two equations. The first two equations on this slide. What is there we are required to check? We are required to find that H must be C times F plus D times G throughout for all values of X. So in order to show that, there is some work that needs to be done even now. Is that okay? Does everybody realize that we are still not done with the proof of the theorem?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. So in order to show that, let's write U as H minus C times F minus D times G. Okay. Then, by an explicit computation, you can check that U is a solution of the following initial value problem, which means that U satisfies this ODE and U at X naught is equal to 0, and U is differentiable, because so are H, F, and G, and U, the derivative of U at the point X naught is 0. Is that okay? Everybody agrees?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Which implies that U must be identically 0. Why is that the case?
Uniqueness theorem.
So we are using, excellent. So we are using here the uniqueness of the solution of the solution of the following initial value problem. I have a second order linear homogeneous ordinary differential equation with some initial data available. P and Q are assumed to be continuous. There's only one solution to that, and that is U given identically 0. Correct? Is that okay? So what does it mean? It means that H must be C times F plus D times G throughout the interval I, right? So what I have done, for these values of C and D, you can write H to be a linear combination of F and G, and we are done, right? This is what we wanted to prove. Is this okay with everybody present here?
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, I am not clear why U equal to 0 there by uniqueness theorem. I mean, how did we get that? I'm not sure.
You look at this, you forget what we have done. You look at this, just this initial value problem, right? Then, then Y identically 0 is a solution of this initial value problem, correct? Is that correct?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yes. And the uniqueness theorem tells us that there is a unique solution to this initial value problem on the interval I. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So that would mean that if you have any other solution of this initial value problem, that must be identically 0 on the interval I. So that means that u is identically 0 on the interval I. I will include that here. Yeah, u is identically 0 on the interval I.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. It
Yes.
clears my confusion.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you, okay, all right. Anything else? Is everybody with me up till this point?
Ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, this is only for some x naught belongs to I, right?
Correct.
So not for all the elements in I.
Yeah, so you need information only at one point of the interval I. Yes.
So we can't write h of x equal to c times f and like that for all x, right?
We can. That's what we have shown. You know, at this stage, we can only say h of x equal to c times f of x naught plus g times g times x naught. But you know what we did here? This says that. So you know, so let's see. What is this saying? You look at this initial. So maybe I'll write if there's a confusion. So what is this saying? You look at this initial value problem, y double prime plus px y prime plus qx y equal to 0, right? Y of x naught equal to 0 and this. You look at this initial value problem and you realize, you note that y identically 0 is a solution of star. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, that's the first thing. And the second observation is the following, that the uniqueness theorem says that if P and Q are continuous on the interval I, so I messed up the spelling of continuous. So if P and Q are given to be continuous on the interval I, then the above initial value problem admits a unique solution on the interval I. Correct? That's by the uniqueness theorem.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Oh.
So that means that the only solution of this initial value problem, on the interval I is given by y to be identically 0.
Okay.
Correct?
Okay.
But our calculations show that if you define u as, if you define u to be the following, yeah, you define u to be h minus cf minus dg, then so where do you define? So on the interval I, then u also satisfies this initial value problem on the interval I. So the uniqueness of the solution forces us that u must be identically 0 on the interval I. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes? Okay. Yeah.
Thanks.
Is that okay with everybody present here?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. All right. Let's just go back to the slides. All right. So let's move on. Okay. So let's recall the dimension theorem says that if P and Q are continuous on an interval I, then this second order linear ordinary differential equation in standard format given by d square y by dx square plus px dy by dx plus qx y equal to 0 if you look at this differential equation, then the solutions form a vector space of dimension 2. Yeah, so there must be two linearly independent solutions of this differential equation, right? Now, so let's just recall, how do we check for linear independence, right? Okay, let's just quickly recall the definition. When do we say two functions are linearly independent? Please recall, two functions f and g are linearly independent on an interval I if neither is a constant multiple of the other on the interval I. Yeah? So which means that if there are constants C1 and C2 such that C1f plus C2g equals 0, and this holds throughout the interval I, then the only possibility is that C1 and C2 be 0 if we are assuming f and g to be linearly independent on the interval I. Yeah. Yeah, I hope everybody is with me up till this point.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So,
Yes,
you know,
ma'am.
when you say linear independence of two functions, it is very, very important to specify where, on which interval are you saying that two functions to be linearly independent. Yeah, so let's just see. So for example, you know, sine 2x and sine x cosine x are evidently linearly dependent on the real line, correct? But let's say, look at the function x and absolute value of x. These are linearly dependent on the interval 0 to infinity. However, these two functions are linearly independent on minus infinity to infinity. Correct? Is that okay with everybody present here?
Yes.
Yes. So it's very, very sort of important to keep track of which interval are we talking about. Yeah? So another thing, you know, which we should be careful about is that if f and g are linearly independent on the interval I, that means that neither f nor g can be identically 0 on the interval I. Correct? Yeah. Almost follows from the definition. Yes. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Let's see.
Ma'am, actually, I had a question.
Yes.
For example, if we take x to be -1 in this case, then
X
even
sorry, say that again. X to be -1.
yeah, the second question, the functions x and mod x are linearly dependent on 0 to infinity.
Yes.
So what if we take suppose x to be -1, just for example, any value of x.
Okay.
So ma'am, if we take x to be -1, then we might get a linear, we will get a linear dependency in the two situations, right?
See, I don't understand when you say x to be -1. We're talking about two functions here, and we're talking about a certain, you know, we say that they are linearly independent if we cannot write.
I think.
Yeah.
I think he's trying to say that, you know, it will be linearly dependent separately on minus infinity to 0 as well, and also linearly dependent on 0 to infinity.
Say that again, please. It will be.
So x and mod x are also linearly dependent on minus infinity to 0 separately.
Correct.
Yes, that I think that's what he was trying to point out.
Right.
Yeah. So because, you know, when you say x takes the value 1, that means, you know, that is sort of irrelevant to the concept of linear independence, you know, as much as I can.
Got it, ma'am. Got it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
is that okay? All right. Because you're talking about functions and on certain intervals, not what value it takes. Okay, good that it is sorted. Okay, let's see. All right. So this was a bit of a digression on linear independence. Getting back on track, let's discuss one of the practice problems which are recently uploaded on Moodle. So suppose somebody tells you, you know, find the solution space of, find the dimension of the solution space of the following second order homogeneous differential equation. So I have x squared d square y by dx square minus 4x dy by dx plus 6y equals 0. All right. On the interval, so, you know, very important to specify which interval are we talking about. On the interval -1 to 1. Yes. Okay. So let's look at this first. Yeah, let's forget about -1 to 1. Let's look at the interval 0 to 1. If I ask you the same question, what is the dimension of the solution space of this ODE on the interval 0, 1? What would be your answer?
2.
2. Why is that?
Because P and Q are continuous. So
P and Q are continuous on the interval 0, 1. So you directly appeal to the dimension theorem, right? You're all sorted, done. Similarly, if I ask you the same question on the interval -1 to 0, find the dimension of the solution space of this
Again.
ODE on -1
Again, it
to
will
0.
be 2 only, ma'am.
2.
Again, it will be 2. Simple, you know, this is evident, straightforward from the dimension theorem. But if I ask you what is the dimension of the solution space on the interval -1 to 1, you cannot appeal to the dimension theorem directly, because P here is -4 by x and Q is 6 by x square. Both of them fail to be continuous at origin, which belongs to the interval I. Correct? So there is some analysis required, right? Yes, is that okay?
Yes,
So,
ma'am.
yes, okay. So how do we go ahead from this point? So let's make an observation. First is the following, that if I look at the intervals, 0 to 1 or -1 to 0, then any solution of this ODE is given as a linear combination of x square and x cube, right? We all agreed that the dimension is 2. So I have two
Ma'am?
yes.
I think this type of equation always takes solution of the form x raised to n, right? So from there also we can find out that it will be x
So
square and x cube.
so to my mind, so for example, this particular equation was there, I think appeared in one of your tutorial
Batch.
one
Yes,
problem.
yes,
Yes. So, you have actually solved this, and,
Yes.
you substituted y equal
X
to
raised to
power
n.
m, and you
Yes.
figured out, what is this. And
Right.
then, the more general theory will be developed a little later in this course. So I'll sort of postpone the answer to your question. We will also discuss the detailed method, but a little later. But as far as this example is concerned, this was taken up in one of the tutorial 1 problems. Okay, so everybody agrees? Yes.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
How did you come up with x square and x cube?
So that's what I'm saying. This is one of the problems in tutorial 1, that you start with y equal to x to the power m as a solution, substitute in there, and then you figure out, your calculation will tell you that m can be either 2 or 3. So that's how you get it. Okay, so all I'm trying to say is that on the intervals -1 to 0 and also on the interval 0 to 1, I have two linearly independent solutions. X square and x cube are linearly independent on each of these intervals, and any solution must be of the following form, right? It must be a linear combination of these two solutions, and we are done. Correct? Right? Is that okay? Everybody with me?
Yeah, ma'am.
But it's an altogether different story if we have to look at the solution space of this ODE on the interval -1 to 1. Okay. Now let's see. So let's see how do we do. So let's look at the case when I is the sub-interval -1 to 1. Okay, so we all agreed that the dimension theorem does not apply directly because the coefficients P and Q fail to be continuous at the point 0. But however, we can say the following. Any solution y of this ODE on the interval -1 to 1 must take the following form. Yes, why is this? So on the interval -1 to 0, the solution must look like some linear combination of x square and x cube. And likewise, on the interval 0 to 1, the solution must look like a linear combination of x square and x cube. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, everybody agrees with me up till this point. Okay, and now, so this part is fine, right? I am just restricting to the interval -1 to 0. Now let's just go back to our original question. What is the dimension of the solution space of this ODE on the interval -1 to 1? So how do we compute the dimension of the solution space on the interval -1 to 1? If I know that any solution on the interval -1 to 1 must take the following form as described here by equation 2. Any suggestions?
We can say that for a general format, we can say that it will be alpha times ax square plus bx cube plus beta times cx square plus dx cube. Now opening up and summing up coefficient of x square and collecting coefficient of x cube, we'll get some gamma times x square plus delta times x cube.
So you're saying it must be a 2 parameter family. So you're saying the dimension must be 2.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So anybody else would also like to sort of say something?
Ma'am, or we can just write ax square plus bx cube plus some constant k into cx square plus dx cube.
Say that
I
again.
think that would also work.
Say that again. Ax square plus bx cube plus. I sort of missed one.
Plus some constant. Plus some constant k into cx square plus dx cube.
Plus constant 8 times x square plus dx cube. Yeah, that's much the same as your friend is suggesting, right? It's the same, right? Isn't it? Yeah. Okay.
More or less.
More or less. Okay. But we should also see what happens to the solution at 0. The way I have stated, it's not even defined at 0. But you would want the solution to take some value on 0, right? You want the solution on the entire interval -1 and 1, right? There's some thought has to go into that also, right? We are completely disregarding what happens to y at 0, right? What would be y at 0?
0.
Y at 0 would be 0. Why? Because you want the function y to be at least continuous, right? The second thing is that we want y to be differentiable, right? On the interval -1 to 1. So there's so there's no problem in the differentiability on -1 to 0 and 0 to 1. All you need to do is check the differentiability at 0. So what would be the, so is y differentiable at 0? The way I have defined in equation 2?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, the third thing is that you want the y is a solution of a second order ODE, right? So y is twice differentiable, right? So is y twice differentiable at the origin?
Yeah.
Is that always the case?
No, A and C
should be
same.
equal.
Correct, right?
A and C should be 0.
So A and C should be same, right? Not necessarily 0.
Yeah, same.
And in fact, they shouldn't be, right? A and C must be the same, right? That is imposed by twice differentiability of the function y at the origin, right? So that would mean that so there are 3 parameters here, right? That would mean that the dimension of the solution space is 3. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, what do you mean by solution space? I'm confused over that.
Solution
dimension.
Sorry.
Null space.
Yeah, null space. Right. Solution space means the set of solutions form a vector space. So that's why I'm saying it's solution space. And or you want to look at it as, as we said, let me just go back to that slide. We defined a differential operator, right? Where is it? Here. Yeah. So associated to a second order linear homogeneous ODE, you define this operator, and then you look at the dimension. There's a associated, so this is a linear transformation, and there's a null space, and we're talking about the dimension of that. Is that okay?
Yeah, ma'am, that I understood.
So the set of solutions of the second order homogeneous, second order linear homogeneous ordinary differential equations actually form a vector space. Yes?
Yeah.
So there's a dimension to that. Yeah. So we are discussing the dimension of that vector space, right? So let me just go back to what we were discussing. Okay. Where were we? Yeah. So we all agreed that the coefficient, A and C must be the same, right? Is that okay? All right. So does that imply that the dimension of the solution space of this ODE on the interval -1 to 1 is 3?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that okay with everybody?
No,
ma'am.
What's the third function?
Sorry?
Can you repeat your argument how you can say dimension is equal to 3?
So there are 3 parameters here, no? A, which is equal to C, B, and D.
Okay, ma'am. And then dimension depend upon.
No. See, I'm just thinking aloud. I'm trying to sort of confuse you. Yeah. So the dimension is 3. I'm going to sort of give you the solution says. Don't get confused, right? All I'm trying to say is A is equal to C. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. And now when you say that the dimension of solution space is 3, you should be able to find 3 linearly independent solutions to this ODE on the interval -1 and 1. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So 2 you already know. What are those? X square and x cube. Correct? What is the third solution? What can be the third solution?
Identically 0.
identically 0, will that
No,
work?
not identically 0. You should say y equal to 0 at x equal to
X
0.
equal to 0.
See, if you just say y equal to 0 at x equal to 0, that doesn't say anything. No, you need y is the solution of the ODE. So you need y to be defined everywhere on the interval -1 to 1. What is the value that y takes out, meaning elsewhere? You have to specify that, right?
I think it would be x square.
Yes.
And x cube on -1 to 0 and 0 on 0 to 1. And the third one will be x cube on 0 to 1 and 0 on -1 to 0.
So I'll write something. What do you think about this? So do you all agree each of these functions are actually solutions to the given ODE on the interval -1 to 1? X square is, x cube is also. How about x square absolute value of x?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, is that okay? See, I'm forced to take this because any solution has to be a linear combination of x square and x cube, right? So that leaves very little choices. Yeah, I'll just pause. I'll wait for you to sort of ponder about this.
So then, ma'am, when no, I got it.
Ma'am, in this case, the dimension of the solution space is not coinciding with the order of the homogeneous space.
Right. But this case, see, the interval we are considering here is -1 and 1. The theorem applies only if the coefficients P and Q are continuous on that interval. Over here, P and Q fail to be continuous at 0, which belongs to the interval -1 to 1. So the theorem does not apply if in this example, if we focus on the interval -1 to 1.
Okay.
Yeah, is that okay? So, when you apply that theorem, there are many sort of hypotheses that go in,
Yes.
and each of them needs to be checked, each of those hypotheses, right? So this
Okay.
does not, sort of contradict the dimension theorem, but, I'm just sort of trying to give you an example.
Ma'am,
Yes.
if you take the x into mod x in place of x square mod x, then it will also work.
So what happens if you take x times mod x? Then what do you get?
It becomes non-differentiable.
It becomes
Non-differentiable, I guess. No.
Double differentiability.
You want it to be 2 times differentiable. Is it that? Does it satisfy the ODE? That is 1. And 2, is it 2 times differentiable? There are 2 things here. Which criteria does it fail?
But actually we want the x square coefficient to be same on both the sides of 0, right? So taking x mod x will create a problem in that case.
Correct.
Can you repeat it?
So what he's trying to say is, in order that the function is differentiable, twice differentiable, the coefficient of x square should be same on the interval -1 to 0 and on the interval 0 to 1. So you will run into trouble if you take x times mod x, because x times mod x will look like x square on the interval 0 to 1, which means that c is 1 there. But on the interval -1 to 0, it will look like minus of x square, which means a is minus of 1, which means that a is not equal to c. Correct? Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes?
Ma'am, any even power of x multiplied with mod x will work, right?
See, but what are the options? The only even power we have here is x square, no? See,
Yeah,
on the
right.
interval -1 and 0 to 1, there's no choice. You have 2 linearly independent solutions, and any solution must look like this. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes? Is that okay?
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, yes, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, is this a unique basis?
Yeah, that is something to be thought about. Yeah, I don't know. Let's think about it. I don't know. Can you
Because I
put up
think
something
what,
here? Huh.
yeah,
Go
because
ahead.
what I said initially, like the first function can be x square.
Okay.
The second function we can take like it is defined as x cube on -1 to 0 and 0 on 0 to 1.
See, you can't take 0, you know, because if you take 0 to be on 0 to 1, then linear independence is lost. No. X, you know, if you 0, you know, if you want two linearly independent solutions on the interval 0 to 1, one of them cannot be identically 0. Do you
Right,
get
but we are considering the whole interval -1 to 1.
Okay, so let me write down what you're saying. Let's see.
0 is linearly dependent with every other vector, so it cannot be a linearly independent solution, I think, if that's the doubt.
So
No, he's not saying 0 identically.
Yeah,
He's
yeah,
saying
right.
x cube and then 0.
Suggest. Can you please say that again? I'll write down.
Yeah, a function which is x cube when -1 to 0.
Okay, so let me call it y1. So this is x cube on x belong to -1 to 0.
0 when 0 to 1.
0 on the interval 0 to 1.
And the function y2 is such that
Give me a minute. Give me a minute. Let me add more pages to this file.
There will be multiple bases anyway. I mean, bases.
But let's see if there's some, you know, some other interesting solution. Okay, so the other solution is what is? Can you please say that again?
Yeah, 0 when x is -1 to 0.
X is -1 to 0
and x cube when it is 0 to 1. And y3x is x square everywhere.
Let me write that down. So y3x is x square. So sorry, x square, right? You said x square.
Yes.
Yep. So this is, I think, totally fine. This is a basis. This is linearly independent, and this also satisfies the ODE.
Yeah.
So yeah, basis unique.
Let's be careful.
Yeah, linear combination will give because x square mod x is basically x cube and -1 to 0 and x cube and 1 0 to 1. It is divided that way, so it's clubbed it into two functions, which is right. This is a basis.
So I will just sort of
But these are not linearly independent, right?
So this is a question. So this is a question. I was just going to put a question mark.
Are they not linearly
Are they independent? Are they linearly independent? Is my question. Yeah. On the interval -1 to 1. You know, I should write. So there are two things here. They do. Does this form a basis? You know, there are two things here. One is spanning, and other is linear independence. Does y1, y2, y3 as defined above form a basis of the solution space on the interval -1 to 1?
Are y1 and y2 linearly independent? That is the question. Yes, they are. I think they are, right? Because C1,
yes,
so it will be. Yes, they will be. 100% they will be. They are linearly independent. Because if you do C1 y1 plus C2 y2 plus C3 y3, let's just break it up into intervals. So in -1 to 0, you'll get C1 x cube plus C2 x square, and in 1 to 0 also you'll get some D1 x cube plus D2 x square. So then again, if they will be
breaking
linearly
into
dependent.
interval won't work. Breaking into interval won't work because
why would it not?
If you break into interval,
No,
you can get C2 equals to non-zero.
Not equal to 0.
One at a time, please.
You can get non-zero C2. You need to consider the whole interval at a time.
No. Of course, I'm considering the whole interval. I'm just saying y1 and y2 are defined specifically in intervals. So I was saying that in -1 to 0, you will take the 0 wala definition of y2, and in 1 to In what 0, 7
Yeah,
you will
I
take
don't-
the
you
other.
I
consider
don't
zero
think
our
that-
definition. If you consider zero, you forget the positive part. You just consider the negative part. Let's
No,
say.
I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. I'm taking the
That,
entire
that's what
interval. I
I'm
get a
saying.
point.
It won't work if you
Yes,
split
yes.
into
Or
smaller
yes,
intervals.
correct. That's right.
Yeah,
that
if
is
you
right.
see on any one interval, it will not work. But as a whole interval
Indeed,
of
indeed,
-1 to
indeed,
1.
indeed,
Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah,
Yes.
on the whole
yes.
interval it works.
That was the entire point.
Okay.
So do we all agree that this forms a basis of the solution space on the interval -1 to 1?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. This is essentially writing x square mod x only. So he's just clubbed x square mod x and x cube.
Correct. All of that here. So I'm just sort of saying that.
Thinking out loud.
Yeah. I'm just saying that. Your point of emphasizing. Yeah. Is
That's
that okay?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
what? Yeah. So, okay. All right. Good.
But
Yeah. Somebody
but
wants.
I have a doubt that why is it okay that the y1 and y2 are not defined at x equal to 0?
No, you define it. You put a closed wherever you want to, at any of these places.
Okay.
Yeah. So you put a closed thing here or here. Doesn't make a difference.
Okay.
Yeah. But
Let's say
so I'll still say check. If somebody wants to say something, there's a somebody wants to say something.
Yeah, somebody had commented before on the cases we had before. Let's say we, instead of C1 x square and C2 x cube, we had x cube and x4 instead, x power 4.
X power 4 is not the solution of the ODE.
No, not this. Let's say for some ODE we had that
Other.
solution.
Okay, so let me write that down. X cube plus x to power 4.
Yeah.
Oh.
So somebody had commented for these kind of solution. If we are considering 3 of them, then the third one, the one in which we are taking mod, has to be some even power into mod x. I think here x cube into mod x will also work.
See, that's a separate question. Let's just take it towards the end of the class. Yeah, that's just too much of a digression from what we are discussing. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me go on. All right. Okay. So, continuing with this concept of linear independence, here is one way to check that. So for that, we need a definition. So for two differentiable functions f and g, the Wronskian at a point x is defined as follows. Yeah. So this is is a matrix fx. The columns are given as fx, f prime x, gx, g prime x. Yeah. So I'm looking at the determinant of this matrix. Okay. So how was the concept of linear independence related to this definition? Let's see this proposition. Suppose that I have two functions f and g which are given to be differentiable as well as linearly independent on an interval I. So then the Wronskian should vanish identically on the interval I. Yeah? So let's see the proof. Suppose that we are given this, right? F and G are linearly independent. So which means that there must exist scalars C and D, not both 0, such that C times F plus D times G equal to 0. And this should hold true on the interval I. Yeah? Okay, so let's just differentiate since the first one is valid throughout I. So I get C times F prime plus D times G prime equal to 0 throughout the interval I. So I can write these two equations in matrix format. So what will I get? I will get the following. Now, what is that I know? C and D are not both 0 simultaneously. So what can you say about this? So the coefficient matrix, fx, so this Wronskian, which means the determinant of the coefficient matrix, fx g prime x minus f prime x gx must be 0 throughout the interval I. Correct? Is that okay? Everybody agrees with me?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, this is basic matrix theory because C and D, we are given that both are not 0 simultaneously. Okay, good. So let's recall what is that we have proved. If f and g are linearly independent and are assumed to be differentiable on an interval I, then the Wronskian must vanish identically. Wronskian of f and g must vanish identically on the interval I. Okay, good. All right. Okay. So here's a caveat. The converse to the statement is not true. It means that which means what? That if the Wronskian of f and g is identically 0 on an interval I, and f and g are given to be differentiable on the interval I, that does not guarantee that f and g ought to be linearly independent on that interval. Yeah. So let me sort of try to convince you with an example. Let's take f to be x square and let's define g to be the following function. So if x is positive, take g to be x square, and if x is negative, take g to be minus of x square, right? Okay, then let's compute the Wronskian separately on the intervals 0 to infinity and on the intervals minus infinity to 0, right? In each of these cases, the Wronskian turns out to be 0, right? Which means that the Wronskian is identically 0 throughout the real line. But are the functions f and g linearly dependent or independent? What can you say? Are the function f and g linearly independent,
Independent.
on the real line, right? It is very important. Where are you saying? Yeah, f and g are linearly independent on the real line, correct? Yes? Yeah,
Yes, sir.
everybody with me up till now?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, all right. So let's just go ahead. Okay, so
Ma'am,
here,
excuse me.
yeah,
Hello.
go ahead. Yeah.
So, like, I was wondering if there is any like linear algebra ka intuition behind this. I mean, Wronskian seems to be like the determinant of a linear transformation, right? So, if the determinant in linear algebra, if the determinant is 0, then the vectors are of course linearly dependent.
Yes.
But over here we can see that even if the Wronskian is 0, they are linearly independent, and we did see an example. But is there
Correct.
like
So that's, yeah. So that's exactly the point that we are discussing now, that in general, this is not true. Yeah. So in general, the converse fails. But under the special case, when f and g are solutions of a certain ODE, then what can be said? Yeah. Please hold on. We are going to discuss that next. That comes next. So you are very right in your observation that we should be sort of able to extract something more out of it. Okay. Okay. So before that, let's run through this. So we have been discussing ordinary differential equations. Suddenly we jump to Wronskian. So let's try to put them together. So we have a second order linear ordinary differential equation, homogeneous linear ordinary differential equation in standard format, d square y by dx square plus px dy by dx plus qxy equal to 0. Now p and q have been assumed to be continuous on an interval I in R, and f and g are the solutions of this differential equation on this interval I. Now, if A is any point on the interval I, so A is any fixed point on this interval I. So I can compute the Wronskian of f and g at the point A. This will enable me, this formula, Abel's formula, will enable me to write down the Wronskian of f and g at any arbitrary point of the interval I in terms of the Wronskian of the function f and g at the point A, and you need some more information about the function f, right? So this has very interesting sort of implication. What does it say? Yeah. So if you believe this formula, the first thing that this says is the following, that either the Wronskian has no zeros on the interval I, or the other possibility is that the Wronskian is identically 0 on the interval I. Correct? The two extremes. Yeah, is everybody with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, is that okay? Yeah. Okay. So this has some interesting implications, and so far we have seen is following, that if f and g are linearly dependent and differentiable, of course, then the Wronskian is identically 0. So let's see. Yeah, let's see how this is very, very useful. Okay. So is the statement okay with everybody present here? The statement of Abel's formula?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. So let's quickly see the proof. So let's introduce some notation. So I'm going to write W of x as the Wronskian of the function f of g evaluated at the point x. Now, so that means that Wx, the Wronskian at the point x, is by definition f times the derivative of g minus the derivative of f times g evaluated at the point x. Now, f and g are solutions of this ODE. Yes, somebody wants to say something? Okay, I'll just go ahead. So f and g are solutions of this ODE, which means that f and g are twice differentiable, which means that I can differentiate this term. So which means that I can write yeah, please mute yourself. Or maybe I should.
Ma'am, that person muted himself.
Okay, all right. Let's just go ahead. All right. So if I take a differentiate, so what do I, wherever I, so I was differentiating the Wronskian. What will I get? I will get f second derivative of g minus the second derivative of f times g evaluated at the point x. Correct? Yes. But what is that I know? I know that f and g are solutions of this ODE, right? Which means that f and g and the derivatives of f and g satisfy these equations that I have written on the slide. Correct? So if I plug in this information in this equation, the last equation on the previous slide, then what will I get? I will end up with the following thing, that the derivative of the Wronskian at the point x, which is by definition f second derivative of g minus the second derivative of f times g at the point x, turns out to be same as minus of p times x, the Wronskian of the function f and g evaluated at the point x. Is that okay? Everybody with me up till this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So which means that what is that I have? I have the following, that W is the solution of the following initial value problem. Yeah, so W satisfies this ODE, dy by dx plus pxy equal to 0. And also this initial condition that at y at a equals W at a. Correct? Is that okay? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So let's just solve this initial value problem, right? We know how to solve this initial value problem. So the solution exists and is unique and is given as follows, right? So the Wronskian of f and g at the point x must be the Wronskian of f and g evaluated at the point a times the exponential of minus of the integral of p from a to x. Is that correct? Is it correct? And we are quite done. So we have finished the proof of Abel's formula.
Ma'am, I did not understand one step.
What did not understand? Say
So
it
we
again.
went from W prime written as f g double dash minus f
Sorry,
dash.
sorry, I'm not able to hear you.
Ma'am, can you hear me now?
Say that again, please.
So we wrote W prime of x is equal to f g double prime minus f double prime g.
Correct.
Then
correct.
how did we get the p and q's over there? I do not understand.
See, f and g to start with were the solutions of this ODE, right? So f and g are solutions of this ODE. So f and g satisfied this ODE.
Okay, ma'am.
F
Okay,
double
okay,
prime
okay.
plus p times f prime plus q times f equal to 0. And likewise for g.
Okay, ma'am. Got it.
So you just use this and plug it in there, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. So is that okay with everybody present here?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. So having proved the Abel's formula, here are some sort of consequences of the Abel's formula. So under the same hypothesis, we are working with the second order linear homogeneous differential equation in standard format. P and Q are assumed to be continuous on the interval I. Then if the Wronskian of f and g vanishes at some point A of the interval I, then the only possibility is that the Wronskian is identically 0 on the interval I. Correct? And the second thing is following. So f and g are linearly dependent on the interval I if and only if the Wronskian vanishes at a point, at some point of the interval I. Yeah? So you see here, in general, statement 2 is not true. Statement true, you know, we saw an example also. But if f and g are solutions of a second order linear homogeneous differential equation whose coefficients are assumed to be continuous on a certain interval I, then Wronskian actually completely determines the linear independence or dependence of the solutions. Is that okay? Yeah. So 2 can be, for example, restated in the following manner: f and g are linearly independent on the interval I if and only if the Wronskian is non-zero throughout the interval I. Yeah. Maybe I'll pause for a minute for you to sort of absorb the statement of the theorem. Any questions, please ask.
Ma'am, for the second point,
Yes.
uh,
We will see a proof. Yeah. But nevertheless, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, for the second point, we don't need to specify, matlab, if it is 0 for some a belongs to I, then it is of course 0 for every a belongs to, or every x belongs to
Every
I, right?
point on I. Correct, correct. So that is that follows from the Abel's formula.
Ha, ha, ha.
Correct, correct. Yeah.
I again got confused a little bit. So
Yeah. Go ahead, go ahead.
over here we are writing if and only if, but in this एकदम स्टार्टिंग में आपने जो दिखाया वहां पर
See, so in that, over here when we had, so you're pointing to this proposition, right?
yeah.
See this proposition, f and g are any two linearly dependent functions. And the theorem that we are discussing now, f and g are solutions of a second order linear homogeneous differential equation in standard format with coefficients continuous on a certain interval. They're not some random functions. Yes.
Okay, so over here f and g are like any functions, and over there they are the solutions of an ODE.
Correct. Solutions of not just any ODE, they're solutions of something very special. Yes, that's the point.
Okay.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yes.
Yes. So if f and g are solutions of this ODE, so there's a whole lot that goes in. Second order linear homogeneous in standard format with continuous coefficients, then Wronskian is in business. Otherwise, you have only one-way implication. Yeah, is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So is everybody with me up till this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So if that is the case, then let's see the proof. So let's look at the proof of the first part, which means that if the Wronskian is 0 at one point, then we need to show that the Wronskian is 0 identically. So this is straightforward from the Abel's formula, because if Wronskian is 0 at one point, then the Abel's formula says that the Wronskian at any other point x is the Wronskian at the point A times a certain exponential, which would that imply that the Wronskian is identically 0, and we are done with the proof of part 1. Correct? Now let's look at the part 2 proof, right? So part 2, as we just pointed out, we just discussed that one part is done. Which part is done? That if f and g are linearly dependent, then the Wronskian is 0 at some point. This we discussed, right? I'll just go back to that slide again. Yeah. So this. So if f and g are linearly dependent, then the Wronskian is in fact identically 0, right? So this part is done. What is now to be done is that the converse statement is also true if f and g are solutions of a certain second order linear homogeneous differential equation and things like that. Correct? So let's just focus on that part. Let me go back to the statement. So everybody agrees we have to prove only one part of second part of this theorem. Yeah. So let's just see what is that we have to do. Okay, so let's assume that Wronskian of f and g is 0 at some point A in the interval I. Remember, what is that we need to prove? We need to prove that f and g are both linearly independent, sorry, we have to prove that, I'll take my words back. We have to prove that f and g are linearly dependent on I, correct? Yes. So if f were to be identically 0 on I, there's nothing to be done, right? So then we are done, right? F and g are linearly dependent. So let's assume that f does not assume the value 0 at some point in the interval I, which means that there must be a subinterval of I for which f is never 0. So again, what am I using here? What am I using here?
Continuity of S.
Continuity of f, right? Which is guaranteed to me because f and g are solutions of a second order differential equation. Okay. So which means that on j, I can consider the function g by f, right? Because f does not assume the value 0 on j. And let's take the derivative. So the derivative of g by f is by definition f times the derivative of g minus the derivative of f times g by f square. Okay, now you notice that the numerator here is precisely the Wronskian of the function f and g, of the functions f and g evaluated at the point x, and the denominator is as it is, f square x. Now that is 0. Why is this the case? I claim that this is 0 on the interval j.
Because the Wronskian was supposed to be 0. Like we took
Wronskian was
that
supposed to be
supposition.
0 at some point, right? Yeah. Yes. Is that okay? All right. So we are fine, right? So what does it say? This says that the derivative of g by f is 0 throughout the interval j, which means that the function g by f must be a constant, which I am denoting by k on the interval j. Correct? Yeah. So what is that I have? F is a constant multiple of g on the interval j. What is that I am required to prove? I am required to prove f must be a constant multiple of constant multiple of g throughout the interval I, correct? So I'm still not done, right? There's something more here to be done. So how do we do that? So
At the points we are anyway assuming that f is 0. We are already considered for non-zero cases.
No. So this is under the assumption that f takes, so f is not 0 at some point of I, right? So we don't know what happens actually outside j. See, all of this is true. The derivative of g by f is 0 only on j. Outside j, we have actually no information as of now. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, I realized that there can be two different j's in which the constants can be different.
Correct. So how do we say that, we need to have a same constant that works for the entire interval I, correct? So that needs to be taken care of and that needs to be established. So this is what we want to show. We want to show that g is k times f throughout the interval I, and in order to do that, we do the following. We know that if x naught is a point in j, then we cook up the following initial value problem. So what is it? The ODE is the same. So the ODE is y double prime plus px y prime plus qx y equal to 0. The initial data is at the point x naught. Y of x naught is 0, y prime x naught is 0. Now, again, I will appeal to the uniqueness theorem to say that this ODE has a unique solution, namely the trivial solution. Yeah, that is one observation. Where does it have a unique solution? On the interval I, wherever the coefficients p and q are continuous. On the other hand, I will make this observation that if I consider this function g minus k of f on the interval I, see, g is equal to k of f only on j, but I can still talk about this function g minus kf on the interval I. That satisfies this initial value problem on the interval I, and hence the uniqueness of the solution of this initial value problem forces that y must be identically 0 on the interval I, which is exactly saying that g is k times f on the interval I. Yeah. So this is saying that g and f are linearly dependent on the interval I. Yes. So with this, I think I'll just pause here. I'll just stop the recording and